me tell you what some of the things I was taught and still continue to be taught. When I was in middle school, my older cousin taught me that what it meant to be a man was to hook up with as many people as you could, to really just allow your sexuality to drive you. When I got into high school, I learned that what it meant to be a man from some of my friends' fathers was to have a lot of money and to put money and work first. I lived in a very affluent area, and so what does it mean to be a man? Power, money, respect. As I've continued to grow older, what does it mean to be a man? I look at different cultural stereotypes of masculinity. If I talk to you about and say, hey, think of one like father you see on TV, what comes to mind? Like television fathers. Like what kind of person is a television father, right? Mr. Incredible. Fred Flintstone. We have different portrayals of like fatherhood in the media, and like there are some good ones, but a lot of them I think like Peter Griffin from Family Guy, like lazy, annoying, stupid. Guys, in culture, sometimes people are afraid of you. We get portrayed as violent, lazy, addicted. We have people who lack self-control. And a lot of all of those lines of what different people say masculinity and men are or are not, there's all those distortions that exist in our world. Some people talk about gender and sex, and we've split the two up. And maybe even here, there's some people who are wrestling with aspects of that. You don't feel at home in your own body, or maybe you know somebody who's experiencing gender dysphoria, who was born a man, but they don't necessarily identify that way. And we can get confused with all the stereotypes that exist too, because when I went to men's sessions, I'd show like a clip from like a guy's movie like Gladiator or Braveheart, and people would grunt and sweat, and we'd like burp and be awesome. Be like, yeah, that's what it means to be a guy. I would talk about sports, I'd put up some football clips, but I never identified with a lot of that stuff. As a guy, I was like, that's cool, but like I like music. Like I like to do things that are athletic, but I don't know that I get into the grunting, Braveheart, like let's go to war kind of stuff. Maybe you do too. Maybe you feel that same way. What does it mean to be a guy? Here's the thing. If God created you, there's two ways that we can go in our world, gentlemen. Either God created things with a purpose, and things matter, and there's an intentionality behind creation, or he didn't, and nothing matters. It all just kind of is. Now, if you're here, I'm assuming that perhaps a part of you is at least open to the fact that there is a God, that God creates things with intentionality, and that God has created you, and maybe you're opened up a little bit more to the fact that God actually loves you, has a plan for you, and has a desire for your well-being. Now, follow along with me here. If that's the case, that means that when you were born, biologically male, that means something about you, that God had an intention for making you the way that you are. And we might wrestle with that, and that's okay. It's okay to wrestle and to struggle. But I want to just put forward to you that perhaps there's a plan that God has for your masculinity, and that to live into that plan is to find freedom and to find hope and to find joy and to be fully who you are. And to live outside of that is to experience sort of a dissonance or a tension in our world, and actually to let our world down. There's a crisis of masculinity in our world because we don't understand it. See, I'm not going to stand up here and give you a bunch of gender stereotypes about what guys are or what guys aren't. And I'm going to say some things, and you might say, well, because you're saying that thing, does that mean that women are not that thing? Not necessarily. Men and women were created and willed equally by God, but we reflect attributes of who God is in different ways. If we want to know who we are as men, we have to go beyond what culture says, beyond what maybe we've been told by other people, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, and ask, what does God say about who I am as a man? What does God have to say about my masculinity? Because if God created me, that means that God knows me and knows what his plan is for me and what he's given me better than I do. But in our world, that has become very, very distorted. Jesus is talking in Matthew 19, and he's getting asked a question. It's a tough question. And Jesus is answering the question. It's about divorce, and divorce is something that is tragic. And Jesus is answering a question that in that time was even more tragic, because if you were to divorce your wife, it actually put her in a low social standing. And so people are like, Moses said we could divorce our wives. What do you think? And they're trying to trap Jesus with this question. And Jesus' response is he says, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? Jesus said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two, but one. It's kind of like a random passage. Here's why it's actually so important. Because when people talk about sexuality and gender in our world, sometimes they'll say, Jesus never said anything about this stuff. He never said anything about what it means to be male or female, or if there's anything in between, but Jesus does. Jesus says something in Matthew 19 about it, and he references the beginning, which is the beginning of Scripture, Genesis. And the beginning of Genesis talks about some divine truths. Truths that go beyond maybe what we'd understand to be historical fact, but are spiritual truths. In Genesis chapter 2, God is creating humanity. It says, the Lord formed man out of dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. Before this, in Genesis chapter 1, it gives us a little different view. It says that God created male and female in his image and likeness, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. These simple words contain real deep truths. Here's one. You were intentionally willed by God, and God has breathed his life into you. God has formed you intentionally. Here's the second one. Male and female are made in God's image and likeness. Now, God doesn't have a gender. God is genderless. We refer to him as God as our Father because he's been revealed as Father. But when God creates humanity, he creates them male and female in his image and likeness, which means that men and women reflect unique attributes about who God is. That to look at a man and a woman together side by side is to say, I can see and know something about God just through their very biology. Think about that. A woman has an ability you do not have. She can bear and carry life and birth it into the world. Emily Wilson is doing something none of you can do. None of you want to do. None of you are interested. To be able to, you can participate in the act of the creation of life, though. In fact, you're necessary for it. Your part is short, comparatively, but you're necessary. Now, who else can create things? Well, through the book of Genesis, what do we see? God creates light and dark. God creates heavens and earth. God creates all of the animals on the earth. He creates creeping things. That's my favorite line out of Genesis 1. He creates creeping things. And then God creates humanity. And then he gives humanity the ability to create more humans. He gives us the ability to create more beings in his image and likeness. And God, as a part of that creative act, gives all of those beings a soul. An immortal soul. Just take a step back from the men's session thing. Can you just let this reality blow your mind? You exist for eternity. You never go away. You had a starting point where you were created, but you don't have an end point. Your soul never expires. It is eternal. And when God gave you a soul, God put it within a physical body. And your physical body reflects something about who God is. And you're not just a body that has a soul like kind of stuck inside of it. You're not a body that's animated like with a soul. You're a body and soul, we say a body and soul composite, which means that your body and soul are tied together. We believe as a church that when you die and when Jesus returns, there will be a resurrection of the dead and you will receive your body back. And those who go to the kingdom of heaven, that go with Jesus, receive a glorified body. But we don't go into heaven for eternity as purely spiritual beings. After the last judgment, you are again a body and soul composite. So this just doesn't mean that like we have a soul and then this body is kind of arbitrary and it just sort of is. It means that our body is tied intricately to our soul. That's why if we do things with our body, it impacts our soul. You can't separate the two. And as a result, you were created masculine. You have what the church would say is a masculine soul. Now again, there are people who wrestle with this reality, and that can't ever be underplayed. People who experience a disconnect between what they say is their gender identity and their physical, biological reality, that's a tough place to be. And so if you're experiencing that, I want you to know that over the next several minutes, what I'm talking about, I want you just to hear it and to lean into it. I know that there are people here who are experiencing same-sex attraction. If that's you, I want you to listen, because over the next couple minutes, I'm not going to talk about, well, here's what it means to be a man in relation to the relationship you have with women. It's about who you are as a man, regardless of whether or not you experience a disconnect between your gender and your sex. Regardless of whether or not you experience same-sex attraction you're wrestling with it, God created you with a purpose. And God loves you and sees you and wants what is best for you. It wants joy from you. So what does it mean to really live into our masculinity? 3 things. The masculine identity is rooted in our ability to create, cultivate, and protect. And the first one, we'll break them down one by one. When you were created, God put in you a desire to create. As a guy, you have a desire to create. At a basic biological level, the most fundamental, rudimentary biological level, that means to create life. You have the ability to create life. But here's the thing. A lot of you probably aren't interested at this point right now in creating more life. You're maybe even thinking in school, they're teaching me to actively avoid creating life right now. I'm like 27, 28. But here's the thing. You create in more ways than just at the basic biological level, because you're not just a purely biological being. You're a spiritual being. And so a man needs to create. We need to build. We paint. We create art. Have you ever seen a man just enthralled in writing poetry or creating artwork or building something? I have a son, he's going to be 4. He loves to build. He loves to build things. He gets these little Duplo blocks, which really hurt when you step on them. He builds trucks and towers and fire stations, and sometimes they don't look anything like that stuff. But I say, oh, that's great. He goes, what is it, Daddy? I'm like, I don't know. But he's compelled. Something compels him to build. Men need meaningful work. Do you know that if a man retires at age 62, and he doesn't find other meaningful work to pour himself into, he has a higher rate of mortality. He's more likely to die. And they've done studies to like check this out. Well, doesn't that mean maybe if you're retiring at 62, you have bad health? Health wasn't a factor. Work was. Men who work between 41 and 50 hours a week have lower rates of heart disease, lower blood pressure. They have higher rates of arthritis. But all chronic diseases diminish. If you dip under 30 hours a week, chronic diseases go up. It's actually the opposite for women, which is interesting. Some people attribute that to the fact that maybe when they go home, they have a little bit more stress where they take on home responsibilities as well as work responsibilities. But for men, work means something about life. We need meaningful work too. We need to do something where we're building, we're creating. And God gave that command to humanity right at the beginning. Be fertile and multiply. Create. God is a creator. Is it any wonder that Jesus, when he went into a home and God picked Joseph to be his father, that Joseph is a carpenter, a man who creates? It's not a coincidence. God's intentional. It wasn't like, oh, that's funny. Joseph's a carpenter. What a crazy thing. It was deliberate. Jesus goes to a place where he learns a trade to create. What about you? What do you create right now? Do you have a job? Do you have meaningful work you pour yourself into? Are you doing the best you can with school? Are you seeking to build something worthwhile in your life? A sport? Do you have a craft, a trade, writing? Is there something that brings you life that allows you to create something new? Because here's the thing, there's a tension that exists in the masculine identity. There's a distortion that exists. If we're going to say there is God, then we also know that God has an opponent, not equal, but an opponent, an adversary. You call him Satan. And the devil can't create something new, but he can distort it. And so he distorts this. And so there's a tension. Here's the tension. You can create or you can destroy. And you will do one or the other. There's no like, I don't do either one of those things. Your virtue of not doing anything is actually destructive. Here's what I mean. I want to be an artist. I want to create something. And so if I'm not creating it though, what am I doing? I'm becoming lazy and I'm allowing myself to be destroyed in my artistic talent. But here's the thing, it goes beyond that. You can destroy with your words. You can destroy with your actions. You can destroy with your inaction. Men are more violent, statistically more violent than women are. They commit more violent crime in the United States, according to the FBI statistics on these particular crimes, at about a 1-to-5 ratio. We have a tendency towards destruction if we are not keeping it in check with virtue. From the very heinous and terrible to the seemingly simple. My wife is a campus minister, and at the school she worked at, she had an issue one day where a girl allegedly cheated on her boyfriend. Whether or not that really happened actually doesn't matter. And all day she had kind of been off social media because she wasn't supposed to have her phone on her, and so she was listening to the rules. But then at lunch, she pulled out her phone and checked all of her mentions and realized that this had kind of blown up online and that through the day, all of these guys have been attacking her. And so she pulled up her phone to all of these different things that had been said. And you know what I bet it was? Because I bet you've been there. I've been there. It was a group of guys that's like, oh, dude, you should say that thing. Oh, you did not send that. You said that to her? I'm going to say something too. And everybody's laughing, and it's so funny, and it's so hilarious, and it's just, oh, that's the greatest thing ever. And then you don't have to deal with the wreckage of that. Your words, or lack of words, can destroy. I wonder if you're careful with them. I want you to answer a question just with the person next to you. I want you to think about, what is it right now that you are working on? Where are you expressing that energy to create? Because here's the thing, if you don't put your energy into creating something, you'll destroy something. St. Paul said in one of his letters, he admonished thieves. So he's saying, if any of you used to be a thief, if any of you used to steal, do something useful with your hands. See, Paul knew that if somebody had grown used to a life where they were stealing bread, where they were thieving things, that they would need to do something useful with their hands, or they would just fall back into destructive habits. So I want to give you like 60, 90 seconds with one person next to you. I want you to share, what is one thing you're working on right now? Do you got a new job? Do you have a hobby? What's one way that you express your innate creative tendency as a man? I want you to name it to that person and maybe share a little bit about it. You've got like 90 seconds. Go ahead. If you didn't have anything to share, I want you to think about that through the rest of the day. Where are you expressing your creative energy? Where are you pouring yourself into building something good? Even if it's just a boring, like seemingly meaningless job, you're still building the elements you need to have a solid career, a work ethic. We have to work, we have to create, we have to build. The second place where we find our masculine identity is where we cultivate. So in the book of Genesis, God puts him in the garden, God puts Adam in the garden to cultivate it, to till the soil. My son, a couple of months ago, we were grocery shopping, and kids, maybe you still do this with your parents when you go out, I don't know. He's like 3.5, he pulls stuff off the shelf and like tries to hide it in the cart. Do you maybe still do that? I still do that with my wife, so like, no shame if you do. Why do we have Lucky Charms? Because they're magically delicious. He had grabbed like some seeds, like for a garden, off of the shelf, right? And he had kind of thrown them in the cart I didn't see. And so we're going through the checkout, and I'm like, this is crazy. It's like carrot seeds. I have no interest in carrots or planting them or growing them on my own. But I looked at his little boyish face, and he was so excited about the possibility of planting these carrot seeds. And I was like, all right, like let's figure it out. So we planted a garden. And over the past couple months, I've been cultivating this particular garden. And I've learned a lot of things. Plants just don't grow. I know that sounds stupid for some of you. Maybe some of you like work in agriculture, or you have friends or relatives, parents who do. You're like, yeah, of course not, dummy. I know that now, but I really thought you put the seeds in, you water, and but there's all kinds of things that are involved in actually producing something, not just that produces fruit, but produces good fruit. Like I've been working on these tomato plants, because we started with carrots, and I've gotten really into this, guys, okay? We got these tomato plants, and we got tomatoes on them, and they all have what's called end blossom rot. I can't eat any of these tomatoes because the soil wasn't at the right pH level to produce good fruit. Producing something that takes as long as a plant to grow takes time and effort every single day. So when God said to Adam, you've got to till the garden, you've got to cultivate this, he was speaking something about Adam's tendencies, because you will either cultivate fruit in your life or you will cultivate weeds. You will produce one of those two things. And it's inevitable. There is no just, well, I'm not doing anything. You're either going one of two ways. If I can share something I'm proud of, I actually over the last 4 months have lost about 15 pounds because I started working out again. Thank you. Yeah, you can applaud that. That's great. I started going to CrossFit every morning at 5:30. And if you ever want to know if somebody goes to CrossFit, you just need to wait a few minutes. They'll tell you. Somebody over there really liked that joke. I appreciate that. Here's the thing, though. The first couple weeks, it was awful. But I knew where I wanted to go. I knew that I didn't want to be the kind of guy, the kind of dad who gets winded when he plays with his kids. I knew I didn't want to be the kind of person who talked about having a healthy spiritual life, but then you looked at them and you're like, yeah, he's got a healthy spiritual life, but dude, lay off the donuts. I didn't want that. But becoming that man didn't just happen by me willing it. It required me getting up every single morning at 5:30. It required me making sure I knew what I was eating and making choices that put back the box of Lucky Charms and picked up a bundle of kale, which is the grossest thing on the planet. And it was small choices every single day. What kind of small choices are you making, and are they helping you grow into the man you want to be? Sometimes I do men's sessions. I talk about heroes and who's your hero, and I want you to think about the person you want to become someday. And if you've never thought about that, I really would encourage you tonight to ask God who he wants you to be in adoration. And not just who he wants you to be tomorrow, but who he wants you to be 10, 15 years. What kind of man does God want you to be? What kind of man do you want to be? You're not just going to get there. This is Texas. This is a place where football's a thing. So let's say I picked 11 guys who have played football since they were young. We're going to do 11 on 11. I picked 11 guys. I brought them and put them over here. And then I picked 11 guys who have never played football. Who's going to win that game? Let's say I want to have a little art competition. I was like, who's a great artist? And I find the people who've been painting since they've been young. I say, all right, we're gonna paint something. We're gonna paint a still life. And I pick some people who never really cultivated that ability. Who's gonna draw a better picture? And we say that, and it's of course, the football players and the people who draw the pictures. But we don't live like it. We don't apply that principle to other areas of our life, where we would say, well, I know that it takes work to grow into that person. We just think, I'm going to snap into the heroic role. I've done men's sessions where we talk about like protecting the dignity of our brothers and sisters. And people say, you know, when a moment comes up where I need to defend the dignity of somebody else, I'm going to be ready. But they don't do it in little ways in their lives. They still fight with their sister. They still talk back to their parents. They gossip about other people. Well, how are you going to defend things in the big moments if you're not working towards it in the little moments? You are becoming the man you will be in 10 years with every single breath and every decision you make, because it's a decision to sow fruit or to sow weeds. It's a decision to go and say, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go for a run because I want to make sure that I'm staying physically active. Or, you know what I'm going to do? Fortnite. Where are we dropping, boys? Let's do this. Right? And it's not to say that there's nothing wrong inherently with video games. There's something wrong with playing them for 8 hours on a Saturday. There's nothing wrong with being like, oh, like I get together with my friends, we play Fortnite some nights. There's something wrong with making that the only battle you ever fight. You see, you're cultivating the man that you want to become with every single moment. It's not the big moments that make the man, it's the little moments that make the man. So what are you cultivating? Because here's the thing. You can cultivate fruit in your life through four things called the four cardinal virtues. They're prudence, temperance, courage, and justice. And I love these because they're things you can actually work on. They're really tangible. So prudence is making decisions. It's knowledge. It's making decisions with eternity in mind. Remember, you've got an eternal soul. As Chris Pratt said at the VMAs, be careful what you do with it, right? Or the movie awards. Be careful what you do with it. Prudence evaluates, so if you want to develop the virtue of prudence, where you make decisions based with eternity in mind, you're making good decisions. That's simply what it is. At the end of every day, evaluate the decisions you made. Sit down and say, did I make good decisions today or did I make bad decisions today? Actually reflect on your actions. Temperance is the ordering of our bodily desires so that our bodies are subjected to our minds and not the other way around. It's simple. Try to do something that pushes you and is difficult every single day. Wake up 15 minutes earlier. Stop hitting the snooze button. Make a healthy choice at dinner. Do something, these aren't even spiritual things. I'm not like wake up early and pray. Just wake up a little earlier. Choose different foods. Pass on dessert. Go last in the lunch line. Those things order our bodily desires. I want food. I want to sleep. So that when other things come up that are stronger biological drives, I want sex. I want money. We can order those things and say, no, that's not the right choice right now. Courage, fortitude. People are like, I want to be brave, I want to be a bold guy. Here's how you do it. Find situations where you need to be bold and find them daily. You know what that means for you. Offering to pray with a friend, maybe some of you are at that level. Just praying over your meal. Praying before a sporting event. Bring your Bible with you to school. Find situations where you have to do something courageous, but it doesn't have to be this crazy big thing. Just small acts of courage. And then justice. Justice is about living in a right relationship with one another. So the simplest way you can grow in this is give forgiveness and ask forgiveness. What are you cultivating? I want you to think, this isn't a question you need to discuss, but I want you to take just a couple of seconds to actually reflect on it. Where in your life are you cultivating weeds right now? It's sin. Little sins turn into big sins. You know, like, horrible, horrible leaders don't just suddenly come on the scene. Little decisions bring them that way. A man just doesn't one day decide to cheat on his wife after he's been faithful for 20 years. Little decisions brought him to that point. Take about 60 seconds and just to yourself. Where are you cultivating weeds right now? Here's the last one. create, cultivate, and protect. Adam has to keep the garden. He has to protect the garden. And you're also called to protect. Now, if this was a men's session back in the day, I'd be like, you got to go out there, you got to be strong, you got to be tough. We're called to protect in different ways. Some of you will be called to military service. You'll protect that way. Some of you will be called to emergency services, paramedics, as firefighters, as police officers. You will protect that way. Some of you might become legislators. You'll become people who lobby and advocate, and you'll protect the dignity of life that way. Some of you will become fathers, and you'll protect your family. Some of you will use your intellect to protect people. See, it doesn't have to be like this certain like bodybuilder, I'm going to step in and take a bullet for somebody to protect, but you do need to practice the ability to protect others because that is why God created you, to protect. But a lot of guys choose apathy instead. That's the tension. Well, what can I do? Apathy just doesn't care. Yeah, I know that there's a crisis with this issue, but I don't care. I don't even care to learn more about it. I get that it's a political thing, but maybe you've got just an ironclad stance on immigration right now. Have you thought about it? Have you researched it? Or are you just regurgitating an opinion? And that's for whatever side you fall on. Again, because I'm a white man, I'll speak to other white men. I hear a lot of people when it comes to racism who are white, I just don't say anything. That's not my place. I know a lot of guys when it comes to abortion, it's a woman's body, it's her body, her choice. I mean, I believe that it's a life. So if somebody, was gonna, kill my younger brother, I'd say something, but for that unborn kid, I don't know. If somebody was discriminating against and hurting my younger brother, of course I'd say something, but if it's, if it's a person of color, I don't know. I mean, I gotta stay away from that. I mean, it's just not my place. Our world will go to hell on the backs of guys who died saying the phrase, it's just not my place. Apathy. Brothers, what battles do you fight? Battles are worth fighting. Are they online? I think so many guys get angry after they play video games because it stirs up in them this desire to fight a battle to protect, and they have nowhere to put that. The game ends. Just cycle back through it again. Again, it's not the worst thing. It's just I don't want it to be the only place you fight. I want to be the only place where you're trying to protect something or somebody. I want you to become the protectors that this world needs. You've been given a gift in your masculine identity to lead in a very specific way. Women are great leaders, and they lead in a very specific way. And men and women are complementary. And right now, I would dare to say that men are not holding up their side of the complementary bargain. God created men and women equal and different, and they complement each other. It means they fill in where the other is lacking. We need each other, again, at the most basic biological level to reproduce. But on a spiritual level, to fulfill what God's image is in the world. And if you're like, I don't know, what do you mean we're not upholding our end of the bargain? I was in here for the women's session, front to back, full. Now I'm looking out at a room that's about 1/3 full. There's probably, I'd guess, a 1-to-3 ratio of women and men here. Why? Why is it so hard to get guys to come to a faith-based conference? It's not my place. Because apathy sinks in, and we can't be those guys anymore. You see, those are 3 things that are beyond cultural stereotypes. You are called to create, to cultivate virtue, and to protect.